Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey, welcome to another show. With me today is Larry Duchin. Larry is an author, abuse survivor, and entrepreneur, and in his new book called A Book on Fear, Feeling Safe in a Challenging World, he maps out a heartfelt method for overcoming fears and bad memories. So Larry, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk with you. I've been reading your book, and it's so good. And, I want to start off with, obviously, what is fear?
Well, fear is a belief. And our beliefs are changeable. I think that's the biggest thing. So, we're in fear because we have false beliefs about ourselves, about others, about the nature of reality, about whatever we think to be some kind of higher power or God. So, fear comes from false beliefs.
Okay. Is there such a thing as healthy fear?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly the fear, if somebody tells you to jump off a bridge and it brings up fear, that's a healthy fear. Or, walking slowly on the ice, that's a healthy fear. Maybe not taking a hallucinogenic drug on a dare is a healthy fear. So there's certain things that are certainly built into our DNA that's certain like fight or flight. For instance, if we were confronted by a big tiger, we were in a jungle, that's a healthy fear. But most people are in fears that are psychologically based, not healthy fears. They're fears that have been created from conditioning and a false belief system.
What is it that they say fear stands for? False evidence appearing real?
Yes, that's what they say. I did not put that in the book, though, because I think a lot of people know that. So that was, I didn't want to seem cliche or anything like that.
There's another one. I can't remember what it is. Maybe I'll remember it while we're talking, but there's another acronym for it too.
Okay.
I'll have to think about that. But I always say false evidence appearing real, and that's exactly what it is. It's, I think, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the biggest fear we have, the majority of us, is just fear of the unknown, really. It's what's going to happen if. Right.
That's a very good point. Yeah. So the fear of the unknown underpins a lot of other fears. Certainly there's a fear of the unknown around, COVID and what's going to happen with that.
Sure.
There's a fear of, the biggest fear of the unknown is for a large majority of people is what happens at death. Mm-hmm. And so we go through our life kind of living in fear of these unknowns instead of living in the moment. And when we're living in fear of the unknown, we're living in the future. And the past and the future are what hold fear. In the moment, in the now, there is no fear. So we have to pull ourselves. One of the strategies I talk about is pulling ourselves back to the moment and realizing what fear we're experiencing, where that belief system came from, what conditioning. And certainly I'm not in that part. I'm not talking about anything that's not being talked about other people. Certainly that's mindfulness and pulling to the present moment. But yeah, that's where fear resides. Fear definitely resides for most people in the future. Like, what if this happens? What if this happens? And so we go down all these thought scenarios that are not good for us, and it creates fear in us.
Oh my goodness. I've had some really good thought scenarios that I'm like terrified or whatever. By the end of it, I'm like, why did I just do that to myself?
Right.
Because I think that there's so much And I like that you say that fear is based in the future, because that's exactly what it is. It's okay if like, for example, I have a huge fear of open water. So my thoughts are, if I go into the ocean, then I could get eaten by a shark.
Okay.
But I could go into the ocean and have a really great time too.
Right.
But I let that future what if overpower my now.
Right.
And I think that's what most of us do.
Yeah, and we also do that with the past. We'll think, like, why did I say that to that person? Oh my gosh, I messed that relationship up. Or, I said that and that's going to affect my job. So we're pretty good about living in the past and living in the future instead of living in the present moment. And the way that we become aware of that is to start to witness our own thoughts and to see that trail of thoughts and see how it goes off. And then you can start to pull yourself back to the present moment, which is actually all that exists. And that's been, that's not only been shown or been talked about by a number of spiritual people, mystics, advanced enlightened people throughout the ages, but also science has shown us that time is not linear. It's not fixed. So basically science and spirituality have merged in terms of we're living in a distorted reality through a small ego lens where we live in the past and the future, but that's not our true reality.
I agree. I've studied Eckhart Tolle and some of those other guys who talk about the power of now and living in the now. And that is all we have. The past has already happened, so you can't go back there. The future hasn't happened yet, so we don't know what's going to happen. So all we have is now. That's all we have is right now, right this minute.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to say, one other thing about the past, because I know that this is a trauma podcast. And so for those of us who've been traumatized, we live in the past a lot because that's the conditioning that's both psychological, it's emotional, it's also cellular, it's in our cells. And so we tend to talk about not wanting, being afraid of what's coming or being out of control. That's a big thing for those of us who've been abused in different ways, especially sexual abuse.
Oh, sure.
So we definitely live in the past, and we carry that into the present moment by saying, oh my gosh, what if I lose control and this happens? And most people aren't aware of these messages that run underneath the surface. They run under, they're like a virus in our computer, and they affect the operation of us. But most people are not aware of that. And so you've got to unravel, you got to peel the onion, so to speak. And you've got to get to all these false beliefs, and you have to say, oh, okay, this is why I'm in fear. This is why I hold the beliefs that I do, because I was sexually abused, or I was, conditioned in this way by society or my parents, and to start to unravel all that. And when you do, there's a lot of joy and peace and just a really good place on the other side.
Growing up, I had a huge fear of abandonment, and it really affected my relationships drastically, because anytime I thought that somebody, let's say I was in a relationship, somebody was going to break up with me, I would break up first.
Yeah.
Because that way they're not abandoning me.
Right.
Right. And it wasn't until I really started doing the inner work that I traced it back to when I was 5, and something happened when I was 5, and I thought my dad had abandoned me. Come to find out, he really didn't. His intentions were good. He didn't want to get into a custody battle. But my 5-year-old self said, Daddy doesn't want me. And I carried that for years. And that is that living in the past. That's bringing that past with us and having it affect our present and our future.
Yeah. And so, you were blessed because you were willing and able to take a look at what that conditioning was. And I'm assuming you've let that go to a large extent.
Yes.
And so, and that's important because we're here on this earth to evolve and to grow. And I do believe that we choose the experiences that we're going to have, or we put ourselves in a position where we could have those types of experiences. And those types of experiences can be very difficult. Obviously, I was sexually abused by my mother. It's very difficult, but they're also can be major gifts for growth within us to see who we really are in a much larger scale. So, kudos to you for doing that, because there's a large number of people who are not willing to do that, even when it's brought to their attention. Hey, I do this. A lot of people are obviously still asleep as to why they do the things they do, and they're in dysfunctional relationship after dysfunctional relationship, or they duplicate the same type of patterns. And so, but then other people maybe are aware of it, but they're not willing to, go through what it takes to heal. And there's no way, you can't short circuit the process. There's no way around it. So you've got to, really know thyself, and you have to be aware of why you have the reactions you have and how to change that so your life can be much more authentic and joyful.
Absolutely. And it is not easy in the slightest to work on your past and letting go. And that's what I teach people, is how to move past your past and let go of it. And it's painful. And it's tough, because it's those thoughts and those practices and those beliefs and feelings have all been a part of you for so long that it's uncomfortable. It's an, what do they call it? Your uncomfortable comfort zone.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it's hard to let go, because you're so used to them there. It's in a sad way, it's comforting to have those dysfunctional thoughts, because you're so used to them being there. So it does take a lot of work, and it does take someone who's very determined to make a change in order to let go.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Those thoughts, those patterns protected us when we were children.
Yeah.
And they protected us so that we could survive, and so there's obviously many different kinds of scenarios what people went through, and some are extremely horrible in terms of they had to do certain things to actually physically survive as a 5-year-old or whatever. And so, but when we get to be an adult, then we've got to take that more compassionate, loving adult perspective and take a look and see what happened, and have that compassion on ourselves and say, this was what happened, but this is not who I am. This is what happened to me, but this is not my identity. And so that's important. And I know that the universe is greatly supporting all of us in that endeavor in terms of coming to a great awareness of who we are and for healing.
Right. So, Larry, let's talk about how we can let go of some of those thoughts and those limiting beliefs that we are holding on to, those fear-based beliefs that we're holding on to.
So, to fix any problem, you've got to be aware of what the problem is, right? So the first thing we have to do is we have to want to find out what our fears are. And a lot of our fears, as we discussed earlier, some of our fears are pretty evident. Somebody might say that they're fearful of getting sick from COVID, or they may say that they're fearful of losing their job, or they may say that they are fearful of not having a significant other. But then there's a lot of fears that are hidden and tied to some of those fears I just mentioned. For instance, somebody may have a fear of not being lovable or worthy, and that's tied to the fear of not finding a significant other. Or if people who have been abused have a fear of losing control. We have a fear of not meeting our own or others' expectations, and then we certainly have a fear of what happens at death and whatever God. So we want to try and, like we said, unravel the onion. And we do that by watching our emotions and reactions in certain situations, because life will bring us those opportunities to become aware of where we have defenses and blocks and false beliefs. And so we are rarely, we're rarely angry for the reasons we think. Anger, usually behind anger, there is fear, there is, grief, there is guilt. Carl Jung, who's the father of analytical psychology, said that projection is one of the most common phenomenon. And so, certainly when we are judging others, we're projecting our self-judgment. When we're blaming others, we're projecting our guilt. So if we can begin to take a look at those projections and pull those projections back in, we can see the belief systems that are supporting those projections. And then we can trace that back to the conditioning that happened either through childhood conditioning or societal conditioning or other types of conditioning, and say, oh, this is why I formed that belief system. So that's the first step. And one of the things that we can do, one of the things that assists us in doing that is to cultivate and apply practices that put us in the now and in our body. Because again, we talked about the now, and we talked about how our beliefs are stored cellularly in our body, and we have to bring them up. And so some of those practices, could be meditation, yoga, journaling, going in nature, any type of thing that takes you out of your mind and puts you more in your body and puts you more, in the present moment. For instance, nature is a big plus for me in terms of putting me into the moment. Mm-hmm. And then I think the third step is that we have to, what I call is want it, allow it, and trust it. And so again, we have to really want to have a change. You can't just say, I want to have a change, but then not willing to go through what it takes to change. And there's a large number of people who are like that. So we have to want it, and we have to want it, because it's going to improve our lives, improve the lives of everybody those loved ones that we have and everybody that we're connected with in all of our communities. And then we have to basically allow the healing and allow the universe to show us what steps we need to take. Maybe that could be counseling, that could be journaling, it could be drumming and screaming. I mean, it could be any type of thing, that the process to help move some of this stuff and become more aware of it. And we'd have to trust that there is something better on the opposite side of this work, where we're going to find a lot of joy and peace. And then the last step, Tracy, would be what I call cultivate those practices, which will bring us into the heart, because the heart doesn't lie. The electromagnetic field coming off the heart is actually 60 times larger than the one coming off the mind. So it's actually the seat of our consciousness. And most people in the Western world tend to stay in their ego-centered mind. That's how they stay safe, and that's how they try and figure things out. But you're not going to really do any healing or have any understanding through the mind. So we need to move into the heart. And we do that through gratitude, compassion, and forgiveness, which are very important practices that we have to cultivate all the time. And the ego is going to fight us a lot in terms of saying, oh, that person doesn't deserve forgiveness or whatever. And we have to just push through these things. There's a lot of people are in a victim mentality. They've got, they need to move to a gratitude mentality. So we have to find even the smallest things that we're grateful for, and we have to energize that pathway so that it can be, come up more and more in us. And then we've got to, compassion allows us to see that we're one humanity. And so obviously we're in a world now where it's like badly us versus them. And people don't understand that it's not like you have truth and they don't have truth. There's a much higher truth, and we need to all move to that much higher truth. And we do that through compassion.
I love it. Very similar to my teachings as well. You touched on forgiveness, and one of the things that I do that helps me not only to practice forgiveness, and when I talk about forgiveness, listeners, you know this if you've been listening to the show. I always talk about forgiveness of self, not of necessarily of those who've perpetrated against us. But I practice what is called Ho'oponopono, a Hawaiian method of forgiveness, and it brings us back to the present, back to now, back to zero, whatever you want to call it. And it's just a simple little mantra that I just run through my head. I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. Very simple. And the power is incredible. Just running that little mantra through my head, I will start to let go of things without even realizing I'm letting go. But then new things will pop up as well. They'll be like, wow, didn't know that, didn't think of that. And it's really quite powerful what forgiveness can do.
Yeah, it's funny because I know that you've not made it through the whole book. You told me that before we started.
Correct.
And the chapter on forgiveness has got the Ho'oponopono prayer in there.
Does it Ho'oponopono in it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can tell I haven't made it through the whole book then. I just gave it away.
No, it's good. So, that's a very simple prayer. That can be said for those who we think have wronged us, and for those who we think we've wronged. It can be said we need to forgive God. It's just like you said, it's a beautiful prayer that surrenders yourself to a much higher plane of understanding.
And I like it because you don't have to necessarily have a specific reason or cause or whatever for forgiving. It's, it kind of just clears out whatever's there at that particular moment.
Right. Yeah. It's a prayer that just says, that you're willing. You're willing to see beyond the vengeance of the ego or the smaller self, whatever you want to call it. And you're willing to, you don't want that for yourself and you don't want that for the other person. Because when we refuse to forgive, we think we're hurting the other person, but we're actually creating a prison cell of our own making.
Interesting. I've never thought of it that way. Because I do practice, or I do, say you don't necessarily have to forgive those who have wronged you. Forgive yourself for the feelings that you had, the anger, the emotions, all of that. But when I think about it, as I work to forgive myself for different things, sometimes that forgiveness of the other person has come up. And I am able to forgive and let go. And sometimes not. And that just means I'm not ready yet. And that's okay.
Right.
So,
and I go back to the Carl Jung thing about projection, because I've found in my own experience, that's a very important thing. So that when I am not willing to, this is really very true for me. When I'm not willing to forgive somebody else, I'm in a space of non-forgiveness of myself.
Interesting. That's something I'm definitely going to have to look into and think about. Wow. Awesome. That is a great note to end on. Larry, where can we find you?
So my book can be purchased on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. It's basically paperback and ebook.
Right.
And then like Apple and Kobo and all those things.
Okay.
The easiest way to get to like the Amazon one is basically to go to my website and you could put a bookonfear.com. It will take you forward to my website and you can click to go find the book on Amazon. Yeah.
And we'll have those links in the show notes as well. So you can go and purchase his book, and I highly recommend it. I want to read one of the quotes that he puts in here from the Dalai Lama. This one really struck a chord with me. When you are discontent, you always want more, more, more. Your desire can never be satisfied. But when you practice contentment, you can say to yourself, oh yes, I already have everything I really need. And I think that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. And I know we got to go. I was just going to say there's another quote in it that's probably one of my favorite quotes of all time by the Dalai Lama. And it says, like, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion.
I like it. That's perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Me too, Tracy. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's all my pleasure. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We will talk to you next week on the show.